So this week is Parshas Emor. In Parshas Emor, the Torah describes for us the mitzvahs of the Kohanim. One of those mitzvahs is the mitzvah of the Baal Mum. The Kohen who has some kind of deformity, let's call it that, or blemish, which is the word that everyone technically uses, and therefore the Kohen is unfit to be in the service of the Beis HaMikdash. Now this, in our society, would be completely unacceptable. Because you have someone who was maybe born with some, let's call it a handicap, some type of what seems like a physical obstacle. Isn't it enough that in life they're already dealing with these issues, that we now are excluding them? At first glance, it seems like that's the case. And I don't know if I'm fully going to answer this question, because the truth is our society has a perspective which, even though it may sound logical to us, it might not be correct. And I don't just mean sometimes it's taken to a ridiculous extreme, like sometimes they have handicap spots in places that you wouldn't need a handicap spot, and but because the law says you have to have one, so they have to have one, without getting into examples of it. However, we feel, I think most of us in society feel, that we've learned to be more caring, I use the word caring, more aware of the plight of those who are going through difficulty. Thoughtful? Yeah, okay. And we work harder to make sure that everyone feels included.
Not only feels, but is included.
There we go. So not only do people feel included and but we have to actually find a way to have that person get or participate in exactly the same way as anyone else.
But being a Kohen and being able to participate in the service was already an exclusive thing. Already you couldn't do it unless you were born a Kohen. Already you can't do it unless you're born male. Already you can't, already you can't do it if you've married someone you shouldn't have married, and all the rest of these other
If you're not a certain age, right? It seems to be ageist, sexist, all these other.
But it was already not a position that was meant to be an all-inclusive position already. Anyhow,
That's a very interesting argument you make. I don't think our society would accept that as an argument. In other words, if I have an exclusive country club, and I say, I want this country club to be only for Caucasian men, and no Jews, and no... so I should be entitled to do that. But yet society frowns upon that kind of thing. And I'm not doing it because I want to... I'm doing it because I like to be with people of my like thinking.
Yeah, but if you qualify as a public accommodation, that's when you have to follow.
Well, this is a private... I'm not talking about what you have to. This is a private club where the government isn't going to force you to do anything. But still, society frowns upon this kind of exclusion of others, especially based on religion or color of skin or any of the other factors which you should not be judging people by.
I don't think that Kathy's point is limited to some sort of exclusive group or something like that. I think that we have other cases in our society where I fully agree with you that we become...
Well, I haven't made any arguments.
All right. Yeah. I agree with the way you've presented it. But there was a case with the fire department in a major city not so long ago, in which they had certain qualifications for a person to become a fireman, which was to be able to carry a certain load up and down a ladder, because firemen are actually supposed to be able to do that. And so what happened was that it ended up excluding some women who wanted to be in the fire department in that city. And so, of course, there was the proverbial lawsuit. But in this case, the fire department was successful because it was actually a part of the job. So it may be, I don't know enough about this, but it may be that there's something about having a physical deformity in terms of what a Kohen is supposed to be and what he is supposed to do in the service that would make it, would have a similarity.
Well, I don't think that's what, I think she was saying something there, that once something's exclusive and God is making rules, he made rules and it's these people. I'm also not a Kohen, so someone who is complaining that he was born with, the use of only one arm, so he can't complain because I'm not a Kohen either. You're not a Kohen. You're just like me. So you're not being. But I think what you're saying, and it's a dangerous argument because you're saying, well, you need two arms to be a Kohen. That's true, but I'll find you some examples of things that make a Kohen disqualified that one would not think. So, for example, if he has a misshapen head, so he can't be a Kohen, and we're assuming the hat fits, so what's the issue?
A lefty.
A lefty. Well, a lefty might be that he does the service differently. That might actually affect the way that he does things. Right, because he's going to do it from a different direction and a different angle, and maybe the Torah wants that the slaughtering should happen
I think he was
with.
talking about his political affiliation.
Right.
Since the Kohen had to be in front of, was performing the service in front of a lot of people, not all of whom would be so enlightened or so tolerant necessarily. And he's representing God in a sense, in the service. So perhaps it's just that, this sounds horrible even to say it, but perhaps it's just that because he has to be there in a public role, representing God, there has to be a certain image projected, a certain image of perfection perhaps, projected, because not everyone in that audience or there at the base of Mikdash is necessarily going to be open-minded enough to overlook certain types of physical deformities.
I hear what you're. I wasn't going anywhere near this explanation, but what you're saying is, I think, a great explanation. Just you'd get into a lot of trouble for saying this.
Yes, that's why I said
Okay.
it feels funny even to say
Right,
it.
right. If someone was to say, well, you see, it's not you. It's the way that people look at you, and so we're not going to hire you as a cashier in our store, because we want to look more, it sounds really bad, right? We want to look more professional, and you look kind of funny, and so that's going to make people uncomfortable in our store. We don't want to hire you.
But a cashier in a store is different than the Kohen in the base of
Well, you say so, but I want my customers to be pleased. And I know that 75% of my customers are going to be bothered by this person's blemish. Let's say someone has a disfigurement, they were burnt or something, right? So it wasn't even their fault. And so because of that, they look a certain way, and now people are uncomfortable looking at them, and kids are scared of this person. So I think most people actually wouldn't end up hiring, but most people would say, on the contrary, let's hire this person. And so it's a difficult question. This is a difficult question, especially if you go into, I actually wouldn't mind you working for me, but I do need to make money, and you are going to hurt business. Scary, right? Okay.
But is there some kind of connection also with the offerings? They had to be perfect. They couldn't have any kind of...
Absolutely.
defect. So
Absolutely. So, but it's interesting. See, with animals, they are objects. They're objects, so we can judge objects based on their external, shape and form, and we can do that in the same way that we can all look at a piece of art and say this is painted well, this is not painted well. But when it comes to people, we're supposed to be looking deeper than just what the person looks like on the outside. You would think.
Someone with a physical handicap wasn't prevented from partaking of the offerings, were they?
No,
Still-
no,
yeah.
actually, yes. There are some cases not. That's a whole thing from what they can and can't. No, but in many cases, they're still able to eat, even though they're unable to perform the service. That is correct. As a matter of fact, the Kohanim who had blemishes, they were given non-official jobs, such as the wood in the Beis Hamikdash. Someone had to remove all the worms from the wood. Quite a lovely job. So that's the kind of jobs they would be given. Yeah.
I'm just questioning whether if a person who is a Kohen and has a certain blemish, if that reflects something somewhat spiritual or something he needs to
Well,
work
we're going to get to that. We're going to directly, hopefully, if we have time, we'll directly address this issue. Absolutely. But that isn't going to make it very clear to us, though, because we're still going to enter this problem. But first, I just want to make it clear. We've raised the issue. This is a serious issue. This is a dilemma that all of us face all the time. How do we resolve this question? And we're going to look at some of the sources, although I don't know if we'll come to a clear enough resolution through it. Let's look at page 1. Page 1 is a page in the Gemara on Tainis Daf Chaf. I may have mentioned this Gemara in recent times, but under a different context. So we're just going to read the underline. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. La'olam yehei adam rach kekaneh. Person should always be soft or gentle, like a reed. The al yehei kasha ke'erez, don't be tough or hard, like cedar. Ma'aseh sheba Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. There's a story that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, came mi Migdal Gedor. He came from the city of Migdal Gedor, mi Beis Rabbo, from his Rebbe's house. Meaning, he had finished studying. He had just, I'm filling in blanks here. He had just completed his time in the yeshiva. Graduated. Right. Rav Hutner has a whole piece on. We don't use the word graduate in yeshiva. A whole lengthy explanation. He says because that's what happens to new institutions where they claim that once you've graduated, that means you have all the knowledge you need to know, and there's no more learning. Your learning is done, and now begins the work. But that's why Rav Hutner writes, we don't use the word graduate, you can use alumnus of the yeshiva, but not a graduate of the yeshiva. Anyway, and he's riding a donkey, umetayel al sfas nahar, and he's strolling, vacationing on the river bank. B'samach simcha gedola, and he's exceptionally happy. He feels really good. You know, someone succeeds after years of hard work. He feels good about himself. V'haisedaito gasa alav, and he felt very proud. Technically, that means he felt haughty. Mipnei shalama Torah har, because he had studied so much Torah. Nizdamin lo adam echad. All of a sudden, coming across in the other direction, he meets this man. Shahaya mechur beyoser, who is exceptionally ugly. Coming in the other direction, here he is, happy at the top of, this is the highest moment in his life, and coming across to meet him is the ugliest man that he has ever met. Amar lo, and the man says to him, Shalom alecha, Rabbi, peace upon you, Rabbi. Lo hichzer lo, and he didn't. I'm sorry. Shalom alecha, Rabbi. He said to him, the Rabbi Elazar, right? He said to him, Shalom alecha, Rabbi, and he didn't respond. Amar lo, he says to him, meaning it's the other way. The Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon said Shalom to this man, and the man didn't respond. Amar lo, he says to him, Reika, you empty one. Kama mechur oso ha'ish, how ugly you are. Shema kol b'nei ircha mechuarin kamoscha. Is it possible that maybe all the people in your town are as ugly as you?
somewhere along the line, all his Torah learning didn't really sink in.
That's what it would seem, right?
Except that he started it by saying hello to you, and the guy didn't answer, so.
No.
Well, yeah. No, the rabbi said shalom to the ugly man.
Oh, I thought the.
Yeah, no, as I said, there's a three back and forths. So Amar lo shalom alecha Rabbi. The elder man said shalom alecha. I'm sorry. Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon said shalom alecha Rabbi to the ugly man, and the ugly man didn't respond. So he says to him, Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon says to the ugly man, I'm calling him that, the ugly man, you empty one, how ugly you are. Maybe, is it possible that all the people where you're from are as ugly as you? Amar lo, so the man finally responds, and he says, Eini yodea, I don't know. Ela lech ve'emor le'uman she'asani, go tell the craftsman who shaped me, Kama mechur kli zeh she'asisa, how ugly is this vessel that you have made?
Good one.
Yeah, good one. Don't talk to me. I wouldn't even know if I'm ugly. But if you think I'm ugly, why don't you take it up with God? Because He made me. And it hit home hard. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon took this hard. Kevin sheyada ba'atzmo shechata, he realized that he had sinned. Yarad min hachamor, he got off the donkey. Minishtateach lefanav, and he prostrated himself before this man. Va'amar lo, and he said to him, Nanesi lach, I am sorry, I have spoken improperly to you. Mecholi, please forgive me. Amar lo, we're going to call him this, even though this is what got Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon in trouble. The ugly man says to him, Eini mochelach, I'm not going to forgive you. Achetelech leuman she'asani, until you go to the craftsman who made me. Ve'amar lo, and go tell him, Kama mechur kli zeh she'asisa, how ugly is this vessel that you have made? Notice how he repeats the whole thing. And the Gemara repeats the whole thing. Because the man, it seems, was not just feeling the pain of being insulted by the rabbi. It almost seems like, he's feeling the pain right now of the last 20 to 30 to 40 years of people referring to him as ugly. Like, no, please, by all means, take it up with God, and you tell him how ugly this vessel he made is. Hayimatayel acharav, Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon followed him the whole way. At shegiya li'iro, until they came to his town. Yatsu b'nei iro likraso, and the people of his town came out to greet the rabbi. The prodigal son has returned. Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon. Right? He is the great Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, and he's returned, and news was spread, and they had a whole parade, and they had a whole Baruch Haba, and all the people came out to meet him with floats and all kinds of other things. V'ya'omrim, people said to him, Shalom Alecha, Rabbi, Mori. People were giving him all kinds of accolades and terms and titles. Amar Lahem, so this ugly man says, Lamiyatem korim Rabbi, who's this you refer to as Rabbi? Amru lo, this guy right behind you. He's a huge rabbi, he knows all the Torah, he knows everything. Amar Lahem, he says to them, Imzeh Rabbi, if this is a Rebbe, al yirbu kamosa b'Yisrael, may there not be many of him amongst the Jewish people. Amru lo, so they said to him, Ifnei, what's your problem? Why are you saying that? Amar lahem, so he says to them, Kach v'kach asali, this is what he did to me. Amru lo, they said to him, Afa pikein, but still, machalo, you have to forgive him. She'adam gadol b'torahu, he's great in Torah. Amar lahem, so the man said, B'shvilchem, for you, for the crowd, for all of you, Hareini mochelo, I will forgive him. Ubovad, however, Shlo yehei ragil lasos kain, he should not accustom himself to do this. Miyad nichnas Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, got up at his own parade, for his own celebration for his arrival. V'darash, and he got up and he said, La'olam yehi adam rach kekana, a person should be gentle and soft, like the reed, v'al yehi kasher ke'erez, and not tough like the cedar. Lefikach, therefore, zechakana lital amenu kulmus, lichtavo sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzahs, it's only the reed which can be turned into a pen to write a Sefer Torah, a Tefillin, and the mezuzahs. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon publicly was declaring his guilt, his fault, at mistreating this man, and saying that what I did was wrong, and if anything, in order for someone to be a messenger, a deliverer of Torah, they have to be a gentle person, they have to be someone who is considerate and caring and kind, and this was of me very harsh, and that wasn't the way to do things. There's a lot of different points within this story to address. Certainly, the fact that I think at the beginning of the story, you're sort of really upset with Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, because he's just come with all this Torah learning, and this is his first interaction. But at the end, you see, and this is an amazing thing, that with all that Torah learning, in the end, he stepped up, and he admitted his wrong, and he was willing to change because of it. There's an interesting Rashi. If you can see at the top of the page, I didn't underline it, but Rashi says, Yesh Svarim Shekasuv Bahem, there's some books, now there are not too many books in the days of Rashi, so apparently there was some book, which was some kind of commentary, Shekasuv Bahem Eliyahu Zachur Latov. In other words, some versions of the Gemara that had written that this story was actually, this ugly man was actually Eliyahu. But he wanted to reprove him, that he shouldn't accustom himself to doing this. Now, that's a little difficult at first glance, because what does it mean, accustom himself to doing what? Accustom himself to insulting people? We don't see from this story that he regularly insulted people. All we see is that in this instance, he was so overwhelmed. As some of you may have noticed, and I think someone pointed this out directly, that this person had actually started the trouble when Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon greeted him, and he was silent. At that point, Elazar Reb Shimon was outraged and spoke harshly to him. Obviously, we all agree, too harshly, and he accepts. He accepted that reproof, he spoke harshly. The man gave him exactly the right answer, got him back, 1 zing, 2 zings, and now Elazar Reb Shimon realizes his mistake, spends the rest of the trip trying to make up for it. Eventually, he gets up and publicly declares his guilt. The Maharsha deals with this final question of what does that mean you shouldn't accustom yourself to doing it. He says it's clear Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon was not accustomed to insulting the people who were less fortunate than him. But what it is that the real problem here wasn't that Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon insulted this man. It was that Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon got lost in his own greatness. After coming back with all that Torah, he felt pride on his level, but still, it's the Gemara tells us, Daito Gasa, he felt that pride. And when you feel that pride to the point where you blow yourself up and think much of yourself, then we are very likely to be insulted or slighted when others do things to be less respectful to us. If I say hello to someone and that person doesn't answer back, so I think that person's rude. But if I'm a mayor of a town, or I'm wearing a uniform of an officer, and I say hello to someone, that person doesn't answer back, I say, don't you see who I am? Don't you know who I am? You disrespect me knowing who I am? And so when we become full of ourselves, At that point, we are going to take every slight as a serious thing. And so he overreacts, by his own admission he overreacts to something because, so says the Maharsha, that the lesson here wasn't that you shouldn't insult someone. That was obvious. The deeper lesson was that you shouldn't have been so into yourself. And that's what it means. You shouldn't become accustomed to doing this. It means don't deal with the problem itself, but deal with the underlying issue, which was the haughtiness. And so he says that also explains why within his drasha, this new lesson which he learned in his speech, he didn't focus on a person should be nice and not insult people. His focus was a person should be gentle and soft like the reed and not tough like the cedar, as if to say more flexible and more accepting. That's the real issue here, as opposed to the cedar, which is rigid and unmoving. That's the Gemara in Tainus with the Maharsha. The Ben Yehoyada gives this story a little twist, because the Ben Yehoyada is bothered by, in the end, it is quite unlikely that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, would have referred to a person as ugly, regardless of how insulted he was. The Ben Ish Chai refuses to accept that. We're talking here about one of the greatest of the Jewish people. Now, if we say he doesn't make mistakes, of course he makes mistakes. He made lots of mistakes. We have on record, in the Talmud, recorded his mistakes. But this kind of just blatant, complete, utter lack of respect to humanity, the Ben Ish Chai says that's not what's happening here. He says that basically, I'm going to use English terms because it doesn't quite translate in the terms he uses. Basically what happened was, this Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is on the donkey and sees this ugly man. And he maybe feels pity for him, or maybe he just figured, this is an interesting looking guy. And he says to him, Shalom Alecha Rebbe. He called him Rebbe. He went out of his way to show this person respect. How many people meet this person for the first time and refer to them as sir, or master, or any other kind of term of respect? That's Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon actually showing him respect.
Or maybe that's why the guy didn't answer. Maybe he didn't realize that the comments were directed at him.
Well, maybe, but he understands it that he understood. He says, however, he says the custom in this town where this man was from was that the leaders greet the commoners, and the commoners are not to respond. That's the custom in this town. And so this man thought it was normal what he was doing. He was actually respecting Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon by not responding. Maybe the Ben Ish Chai saw such a custom in his own town, but he says that was the case. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, now he doesn't use these words, but I'll give us the English equivalent, basically walked over to this person and said, that is just completely, you are completely disgusting. Meaning, I just called you Rebbe. I just showed you respect. And for you to walk away without even the slightest nod of agreement or recognition of the honor that I just showed you, you are disgusting. Are all the people in your town like this? Completely wasn't referring to the person's looks. He was commenting on this disgusting action that he had done. They use a little different terms because the Hebrew doesn't quite translate. But because the word mechoar, which we translate as ugly, mechoar can mean inappropriate or disgusting, which can refer to both action and physical appearance.
How would the man's response to him?
But this man doesn't know that it's disrespectful because he lives in a society where it's actually considered respect for the commoners not to respond in greeting to the leaders. And therefore, he takes as an assumption that Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon is referring to his physical appearance. So he says here that Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon, this is an example of a misunderstanding in both directions. Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon is showing him respect by greeting him with the name Rabbi. This man responds with respect by not greeting. Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon then responds to the person's actions, which this person misunderstands as a response to the way that he looks. And then Rabbi Elazar bar Reb Shimon feels awful because he should have realized that a person who has this deformity would probably take those words to be a comment about the way that he looks.
So why doesn't it state specifically that he said, you don't understand?
Even if he did, he was still wrong. Because he shouldn't use terms with someone who's ugly, who people have spoken to and referred to as disgusting, quite
You should
likely.
have apologized and said, I was talking about the fact that you didn't respond to me, not your looks. Like when he said, go ask my creator whether...
But it's still wrong. He still, even if he is responding to that, he still should not have used a term that this person would take as referring to an insult that he hears all the time.
I don't understand why he even went to the trouble of insulting this guy. I guess it's because he was full of himself.
But he wasn't insulting the guy, he was commenting on this person's actions.
No, I understand that, but there are so many reasons why a person might not respond to a greeting that will have nothing whatsoever to do with him.
Well, let me say it like this. It's an interesting point. I think that our society doesn't realize the concept of a greeting. You know, there's a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch. A whole siman in Shulchan Aruch. That's a whole section in Shulchan Aruch that discusses where in davening you can greet different kinds of people. There is a separate thing for the people who you can greet in the first place and say Shalom Aleichem to them. And then there's a whole separate series of halachas of people who, even though you can't open Shalom Aleichem to them, you can, if they give you Shalom Aleichem, you can respond with Aleichem Shalom, peace upon you, peace, because you can give this response. A whole section of Shulchan Aruch that talks about this part of Pesukei de Zimra, that part of Pesukei de Zimra, this part of Shema, this part of Shema, in the middle of Shemona Esrei, only to the king, only to... A whole series of halachas. And I remember one of my Rabbeim, say, 8th grade Rabbi, was, one of the kids in class raised his hand and asked a really good question. He said, we were discussing the halacha, that if your father gives you Shalom Aleichem in the middle of Shema, so the halacha is that you can respond Aleichem Shalom to a father. So one of the kids asked a really good question. Why can't I pick up the siddur, show my father that I'm in the middle of Shema, and he'll go, oh, okay. And then nobody's going to be upset. Why do I have to interrupt my Shema? Really good question. And the Rebbe answered, because we just don't appreciate what it means to respond in greeting to someone. If someone greets you, the fact that you're even stopping to take a page and to show it to them is already a sign of disrespect. The problem is, as some poskim want to say, that it could be that this whole series of halachas of when you can interrupt your davening to greet someone might not apply today. Because our society simply doesn't appreciate, recognize, or understand the concept of greeting.
What about disrespect to Hashem by interrupting in the middle of Shema? Isn't that's...
Well, the problem is it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to honor a parent. So if but the honoring parent comes before that honor in this case, because it's a lesser, not in the middle of Shemona Esrei, but in the case of Shema, so then it's two mitzvahs, and there's a system for what wins. And that's why it depends whether you're in this part of davening or that part of davening. But the thing is, only because in those days, it was standard practice procedure, you greet. There is no excuses for not responding, like we would have in our society, where people basically barely greet each other. Maybe. So, Says the Ben Ish Chai, that you see from this that the same term which can be used to comment on someone who is ugly on the outside, it's the same term machoar, which would be used to someone on the inside. The Kli Yakar, I want to get to this, I'm going to skip past a few other points that I want to make. The Kli Yakar, and this is in handout page number 3, is referring to this week's parsha. And I'm going to read, it's a little lengthy, but this Kli Yakar is going to raise more difficulties for us than we already have. He's discussing why the Torah says, first the Torah says, Bo mum, in him there is a blemish. And then the Torah later says, Mum bo, there is a blemish in him. Just, the Torah switches the order, Mum bo, bo mum. Furthermore, the verse here states, as you can see as he cites in the opening line, Ish mizaracha, a man of your descendants, asher yihiyeh bo mum, who shall have in him, shall have is like future term. And then right after that it says, Kol ish asher bo mum, any man who has a blemish, suggesting more present tense. Al kain omer ani, and this is the underline. Shahakadmonim, the ancient ones, shayu bekiim ba'chachmos, they knew wisdoms that we don't have. Hayu yodin, they knew b'chol mumshen ishave ba'adam terem hayoso, they knew a blemish that was going to affect a person before it actually happens. There is a very deep connection between the structure of our bodies on the inside and the structure of our bodies on the outside. A very deep connection. If we would be able to see the soul, the depth, the inside of a person, it would have the same form and shape as our physical bodies. As a matter of fact, we discussed this a little bit in a few classes ago. This is a little complicated, so I'll just say it in brief. The Zohar tells us, I've mentioned this a few times, but I think it really strikes this point, so I'm going to say it again. The Zohar tells us that the 3 angels who came to visit Avraham had the faces of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which is a very strange image of Avraham being visited by 3 angels. One looks like him, one kind of looks like him and his wife, a mixture of both, and the next one looks like someone who might be his grandson. And they actually looked quite alike, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So, why? Because these were the 3 angels, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. Michael is the angel of Chesed of Hashem. Gabriel, as his name suggests, is the angel of Gevura of Hashem. And Raphael is the angel of Tiferes. And even the word Rapha, healing, is in the word Tiferes. Avraham represented Chesed in this world, Yitzchak represents Gevura in this world, and Yaakov represents Tiferes. They represented the same things in different worlds. People look like what they do, what they are, who they interact with. Spouses start to look alike after a while. It's not only sometimes people marry people who are alike, but you can see certain resemblances. Why? Because you should know that as much as you go into a zoo and all tigers look alike to you, we look alike to all tigers. All human beings look alike. We're just accustomed to noticing all the small differences. You know what causes those small differences? Not just genetics, but also the way, the mannerisms, the way that you hold your face. We all hold our face differently. And I can prove this to you. Have you ever seen these people who do impressions? They look nothing like the person who they are doing the impression of when they're standing still. But when they start to do the impression and they do the mannerisms, they actually take on that person's face. It's amazing because we really do look alike. We just hold ourselves differently. Now, clearly, there's some differences. If you have blonde hair, that can clearly be differentiated from someone who has dark hair. We're not referring to that, but just the way. So, the Avraham looks like the man who lives a life of chesed. When Michael, who's an angel, comes down into this world, he doesn't get to choose what body he gets to wear. He comes down as to what the physical manifestation of a being of kindness is. So he comes down and he looks like Abraham. And when Gabriel comes down, he looks like Yitzchak, because Gabriel is an angel, a messenger of Gevurah, of judgment. Now, there might be some other differences. Yitzchak might have had small experiences which made him look different, but basically, overall, he was the man of judgment, and so the angel of judgment, is when he comes into this world, is going to turn into a man of judgment. And so that's why he looks like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We are, on the outside, what we really are on the inside. Our face, the way certain people give off a lugubrious, sort of sad kind of, because they carry themselves that way, they hold themselves that way, and you can see it on the face. And that's why the face is called a panim, because the word panim really means the inside. And
When you get older, though, your face definitely changes.
Well, it depends what change. You have people who are older, but they actually look happier. Right? So it's still on how you carry yourself, and actually, even those the lines and the wrinkles are actually a result of smiling and all these other things, which or frowning. There is a famous celebrity who never smiles ever, never smiles ever. She has trained herself to never smile. So I mentioned names of people, but it's a celebrity. She never smiles because she doesn't want to age. She wants what?
Has it kept her from aging?
I don't know.
How old is she?
I don't know that either. I just read this, so. But it says that there was, because apparently she got married and tried to convince her husband that he should no longer smile. I mean, that's what the article was about. But you think, well, they're saying it doesn't make you less happy, you're just not expressing it. But the truth is, it does make you less happy. Life, if you're not going to enjoy life, so what are you trying to preserve? Right? So anyway, there are all kinds of crazy people in this world, no shortage of those. But the thing is, the way we look represents who we are and what we are. So these kadmonim, these ancient ones, they could actually see from a person's personality and from the person's actions and behaviors where that person is likely to change in their physical being. So he says they could tell that a person is going to get a blemish before it happens. Mitzad eza avan sherobo, when they see a person commit a certain sin. Derech Moshe, for example, im yadushu mekabel shochad. He just gives some easy examples. They see a person who's accepting bribery. Now, bribery doesn't just mean a judge who accepts bribes, but it means that that person accepts the equivalent of bribery, whatever that is in our world. A person like that is going to suffer with their eyes. They're going to suffer with blindness as a result of this action. Imrobo regal gava, if they see the person has the feet of haughtiness, that's based on the verse, that haughtiness is really feet, the way you carry yourself. That person is going to break their foot. Vakaras panav ansuba, and especially on the face they could tell. Shekiru b'mari panav, they could see someone's face. They could work backwards, and they could look at someone's face and tell you this person's personality by just studying their face. Hapogemes eze ever yadua v'sofa lovely de mum nigla, and then they can tell you based on that personality trait that they see in the face. They can tell you how this person is going to suffer physically. And therefore he says, V'roi legoalo min ha'kahuna al shem sofo. So these experts would disqualify Kohanim who did not yet have this blemish. But the experts said that they were likely to contract this blemish based on certain behaviors. Fascinating concept. There were many people who perfectly fit Kohanim, but when they came before the committee of face analyzers, they would say, this person looks to us like someone who is of this condition, and it is quite likely that a result of having this bad attribute, he's going to contract the following blemish, and they would disqualify him. It seems almost strange, this Kli Yakar. Lekach Nemer, that's why it says, Ish mizaracha, a man of your descendants of Aaron, Asher yihiyeh bo mum, who will have this blemish. Sha'akaras panav ansa shel besof yeh bo mum, based on his face you can tell that this person will have this blemish. I'm just going to translate because we're running low on time. For from his actions we can already tell that this person is going to have this blemish. He is disqualified because of the future, and that's why the Torah says, Ki kal ish asher bo mum lo yikrav, for if he would have this blemish, he would not be fit. Don't you agree that if he's got this blemish, he's not deserving, because he is not honorable to appear before God? Therefore, even if this blemish is not there yet, but it's only in the future, he should be rejected. However, that can only be true of someone who wasn't born with this blemish. Because someone who's not born with a blemish, if something happens to disfigure them, it's got to be a result of their actions. Because they've done something wrong. That's why the Torah says in one place, bo mum, and the other one, mum bo, to say that whether this person got it before or they got it after, either way they're disqualified. Question is why? If the person is born with a blemish, clearly they haven't done any action that disqualifies them.
That they're there to fix
really?
something in their, and so this is the way Hashem feels that they could be fixed, whatever the problem is through.
Well, maybe, but I don't know if the Kli Yakar is certainly not going to go to Gilgal, but that works for me. He says, however, I would only know, but I would say perhaps that's only. No, he says. So I would think that there should be a difference. Someone who gained this blemish because of bad actions, they have a blemish in both their body and soul. But someone who's born with this blemish, there's no blemish in their soul, but only in their body, and that's why the Torah tells you that he's still disqualified. The Kli Yakar says, interesting thing. He's saying that you should understand, the Torah disqualifies all people who have this blemish. But you should know that the person who was born with it, that was not a blemish that you can connect to their soul. It's only a blemish in the body. But if the person contracts this blemish, then that means that they've done something to deserve this blemish, and therefore that's a disqualification based on a blemish within their body and their soul, and that's why they are more likely to be disqualified. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this Kli Yakar, especially debating some of these finer points that he's suggesting in the end. But I read this Kli Yakar and I say to myself, everyone knows the story of Rabbi Chaim Kafusi, who went blind in his old age. And he was a great rabbi who was a famous judge, and he went blind. And as people said, a judge goes blind, means he took bribes. And it became a rumor, and he found out about it. And the Chida writes this in Shem HaGedolim. You should know in Shem HaGedolim he cites very few stories. But he only cites stories when he felt that it's absolutely necessary to tell the story. Rabbi Chaim Kafusi got up in front of the whole community and said, if I took bribes, may my eyes stay blind, but if I didn't, I ask God that for the sake of the sanctification of His name and His Torah, that Hashem return to me my eyesight. And he saw. And the Chida writes that he actually saw letters signed by Rabbi Chaim Kafusi, which were of a later date than some, and the earlier date had a very unclear signature, looked like it was signed by someone who was blind. And then later on, you can see from the contracts which are dated later, It was a very clear handwriting. He said, I saw these actual contracts. So he had circumstantial evidence to corroborate the story. Rabbi Chaim Kafusi said basically, if it's true what people are saying, then I should remain blind. Otherwise Hashem should return to my eyesight, and his eyesight returned. That's the story. An amazing, amazing story. So I ask you, if he didn't take bribes, then why do you lose his vision?
There are other causes.
So there are other causes. So there are other causes that it sound like from this Kli Yakar. This Kli Yakar said that there's a connection between the inside of the person and an outside of the person. So clearly, and this is where we can't really resolve the issue, we're understanding that if you do see someone who's deformed in some way, you should know that that does reflect something deeper within the person. But whether it reflects fault in that person, we don't know. It is quite likely that the inappropriate actions of this person have led this person to... So then what are we saying then? Are we saying that the Torah disqualifies all disfigured people because a number of them brought it on by their own actions? Is that fair to reject people who not only have they suffered in their life through disfigurement, but we're now piling them together with these other people who committed terrible sins which causes them to contract this ailment? Seems unfair. But the Kli Yakar sounds like, I'll read it again later if you get a chance, and you'll see, it does sound like what he's saying is that basically almost any time that someone gets a blemish, that's somehow a reflection of what's inside them. So, in getting back to our original question, we said, how do we understand this? Where's the political correctness here? If someone has some disfigurement, and the Beis Hamikdash, we're rejecting this person, I'm not allowing them to serve. And we said, if it's a disfigurement that actually doesn't allow you to serve, we get it. But some of these, one eyebrow is higher than the other, that doesn't sound like... So what are we answering? We're answering that it's actually not the eyebrow which is higher than the other. There's something inside this person which is off. And because of that, they're unfit to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But I'm telling you, I know this person. They're a really good person. They're a kind person. I don't see anything off. You want to go to other lives, previous lives, maybe. But in this life, this person has done everything right. And yet somehow, we are rejecting them.
Well, it's not for us to judge, of course. Right. But I wanted to ask you, wasn't there another thing about the nose, that the Kohanim had to have something... there's a description that their nose has to be, the bridge of their nose. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, they couldn't have a flat nose.
They couldn't have a flat
right. But they couldn't have that the bridge should be so indented that you can go across from one eye to the other. Yeah. And some of these real technical things, and I don't think that should affect someone's service in the Beis Hamikdash. It's really just the way that they look. And yet, in the Beis Hamikdash, we do disqualify such a person from being able to serve.
So, a couple of comments. One is that you can say that some people who are blind have the trait of taking a bribe. But that doesn't mean that everybody, maybe there are other things that are reflected through the blindness that isn't a bribe, but it's something else that can't be identified so easily as the people who listed these things.
Blind.
Huh?
Yitzchak goes blind. Yitzchak goes blind because he...
Not because of bribery.
Right, not because of bribery. Although some say that that's exactly why he went blind, because he accepted all Esav's gifts. There are those who say that was a sort of punishment. But, nevertheless, we do find, the Chafetz Chaim, I'm running out of time, the Chafetz Chaim at the end of his life was starting to lose his hearing, so they wanted to get him a hearing aid. A hearing aid in those days was a trumpet, right? Those little things you put in. And he says to them, all my life I'm trying to avoid listening to Lashon Hara. And God granted me the gift of being hard of hearing, and you want to take it away from me? So in that case, that's not a blemish. On the contrary, he saw that as a gift. He could focus on his learning without all the distractions. But most of us don't see things that way. So I just want to add as a final point. We're in the days of Sfira, and we're celebrating Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai during the days of Sfira, and his son Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon, who was in the cave with him, who was also one of our greatest sages. And part of Sfiras HaOmer is for us to work on better approaching other people. So I just want to point out that there's something about, and this is the key to maybe this whole topic. There's something about, even when you don't hire someone who looks funny to work for you, there's something even about the way that you reject them. There's something even about the way that you express it, that you're not planning on hiring this person. But what do you say to this person? So some people just avoid it and say, I'm sorry, we've already hired someone else. But this person isn't stupid. This is the 5th place that they've come in and saw, and you might even come back tomorrow and see that there's no one there. And they know why they've been rejected. How would you find the right words to talk to this person? So what we're saying is the olam, a person should always be soft as a reed and not hard like a cedar. It means regardless of what you have to end up doing, we believe as a people that we don't reject someone or make someone feel bad because of some external deformity. Doesn't mean you have to hire them. They can't work in the Beis HaMikdash, and that's the key. Do I have to hire this person? God says I don't, because God didn't hire this person. But you have to find a way to respect this person. Even Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon, who didn't mean to insult this person, but he just used the term that made the person think that he was referring to his deformity, made him get up publicly and say, I was wrong, I should have been more respectful. So certainly things like staring or making a comment to that person in a way, and sometimes we think, well, I wouldn't be bothered if someone said that to me. Yeah, the first 200 times. And so during the days of Sfira, we have to be a little more careful about the way that people take things. Sometimes what we're not sensitive about, someone else might be sensitive about it. And even though the Torah says we don't have to hire him, doesn't mean that you can forget last week's mitzvah of ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love someone like you love yourself, and that includes even someone who is less fortunate and less accomplished than ourselves. Thank you.